Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. The effectiveness of urban education consistently registers as a top concern of Americans. Despite this concern, even widespread dissatisfaction, voters find it difficult to figure out how to use their votes to effect improvement. The race for the Cincinnati School Board is an example. It's organized as a field race. The ballot does not indicate a candidate's party or other affiliations. 12 candidates, including 3 incumbents, have thrown their hat into the ring this year for 4 seats. All the candidates promise to put children first, to support high academic standards, and a leaner administration. As a result, most voters fall back on name recognition, and even as they exit the polling booth, aren't sure what the difference is made by their choices in the polling booth. This year could be different. Some clear lines are being drawn in the sand. A pair of letters signed by Tom Mooney, the president of the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, and Dan Radford, the executive director of the AFL-CIO Central Labor Council, attack incumbents Lynn Marmer and Harriet Russel and call for their defeat. Although several issues are outlined in each letter, the crux of the matter is their support of the board's decision to, quote, abandon a decade of interest-based problem-solving, aka win-win negotiations, and a return to adversarial bargaining. What that means is that during last winter's contract negotiations with the teachers union, Marmer and Russell, both former teachers, supported the decision to hire this man, Mark Stepaniak, a lawyer who is known as a tough negotiator in his representation of management interest. To discuss the issues that have been identified between organized labor and the 2 school board incumbents, I am joined this morning by Lynn Marmer, the current president of the Cincinnati School Board, School Board member Harriet Russel, and CFT President Tom Mooney. Welcome to Newsmakers. Tom, why this letter, and why this letter now?
Well, first I have to disagree vehemently with your characterization of the letter, that its central focus is last year's labor negotiations. Actually, there's a whole lot more in the letter, and most of it focuses on policy disagreements that have to do with families leaving the district and schools being reorganized in ways that don't make sense, and alternative schools, successful magnet schools being closed. Those are the main issues in this race, and that's why there's a broad
which
coalition.
were a lot of the issues in the negotiations?
That's right. To some extent, those kinds of issues came into negotiations. They were unusual in that they focused mainly on educational topics.
So we can disagree about what the letter really says or what the central point is, but who did this letter go to and why did you issue it?
Well, this particular letter went to Democratic Party activists and precinct executives who will actually vote on who the Democratic Party endorses. But it's just one piece of literature or correspondence in a much broader campaign. I think your intro is important, is on point in this sense, that this race is unusual. It is the first time since the early 80s that there has been an opposition slate running against a slate of incumbents for the board. There have been a couple independents make a breakthrough in the last 20 years, but it's been since '83 that there was really a 2-slate race for the school board.
Well, and as I assured you that as we go along this fall with Newsmakers, we will get some of those candidates on, but I think you signed these letters and the letters speak for themselves. Lynn, what about this charge? Why did you and other members of the board decide to go to hire a tough negotiator, in this case Mark Stepaniak?
The board was not satisfied with the results of previous negotiations. We felt that there were some fundamental changes that we needed to try and make, and so that's why we changed negotiators. We felt that it was in fact the board's prerogative to choose who they wanted as their labor council, just as it's the union's prerogative to choose who they would like as their labor council.
And looking back on that now, any second guessing, any regrets for having gone the direction you did?
No, absolutely not. And it's interesting to me that I get calls from teachers who say, I'm not sure why the union keeps talking about the negotiations. We signed the contract, both parties signed the contract. Didn't we get a good deal? For some reason, did we really not get a good deal out of it? I think both sides gained some things in the contract. Both sides didn't get everything they wanted, but overall it was in fact a contract negotiations.
Harriet, both of you have been teachers in the past, but you've been a teacher relatively recently, a longtime teacher at Walnut Hills High School, a member of the CFT. Why did you, as the letter says, abandon win-win negotiations and take on this adversarial approach when you become a board member?
As a board member, I didn't abandon a philosophy. What I did was embrace the collective bargaining law's timetable, and I did so because as a former teacher, I know that you have to plan, the school year before, like in January, February, March, for the coming school year. And really, often the negotiations under win-win philosophy would drag on until June. In order to bring about the changes of going K to 8, all right, in order to have team-based schools begin where children would have closer attention from teachers, we needed those negotiations to wrap up. As far as I was concerned, a drop-dead wrap-up was by the end of March. I'd like to have seen it earlier because I always was doing in-depth planning long before that time, in a school year for the coming school year. Planning is important, and I think it's important in order to get the next school year started off successfully.
So you felt that the style of negotiation that had existed, that this letter and that Tom harkens back to as the good old days, in fact had problems for teachers and for organizing the schools. That's your basic point. It did drag things out too long. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it did drag things out too long.
And did the new approach get things done more efficiently?
Yes, it did. I mean, in other words, decisions have been made, and now we can move on and make the best of it for children.
Tom, did this new approach just get us to the end point quicker? And secondly, as Lynn said, did in fact both sides get something they wanted from this? So in effect, we had negotiations where there was disagreement. And yes, we maybe had tough negotiations on both sides, but both parties ended up with something out of this process that they wanted.
We reached an agreement. It's a good agreement. The amount of divisiveness and antagonism that was generated during it was totally unnecessary and will have long-lasting damaging effects. That's why we abandoned that adversarial style 10 years ago. We had plenty of experience with it. It's not like we lack, history to look at. For 10 years, basically, we used the principled negotiations, which is a problem-solving approach. One would think, given that the central issues in last year's talks were educational reform and change, that problem-solving approach would be much more conducive than a traditional adversarial poker game. I still am just amazed that the board thought that was a wise approach. The timetable is, frankly, I think that's just silly. Everybody knows that the SERB timetable of reaching a contract in 60 days is unrealistic. Any experienced labor lawyer or negotiator will tell you that, particularly given the complex changes that we were dealing with. But if that was the board's real interest, frankly, I think this is disingenuous. Why did they wait until November to put these complex proposals for changes on the table? Why didn't they bring us into the room in the summer before when they were devising their strategic reform plan? We could have been working on all kinds of things in committees and subcommittees for months. They chose to wait and spring this stuff on people. If advanced planning was their real interest, we would have taken a completely different approach to this.
Harriet, what about that? Why didn't you bring them in the summer and everybody sit around the table?
Let me say that the previous contract has in it a structure called an Educational Initiatives Panel, the EIP. All right, it is composed of 50% teachers, including Tom Mooney as the teachers' representatives. And they knew clearly what the plan was in terms of the impact that it would have upon contract negotiations, because the drafts of those plans were worked with through the EIP long before they reached the board.
That's just not true. That is just absolutely false. So there's really no point in going down that line. Frankly, I think this is all old news. But that is just not true.
Oh, it's not old news because it's all been brought up again.
They absolutely bypassed the EIP. That was our whole central issue that we started with. They bypassed that joint panel and prepared this strategic plan in the back rooms, sprung it on everybody in September, but they didn't tell us what contract changes they wanted in order to implement it until mid-November. So again, if timing and getting this thing done well before the next school year so everybody could plan, if that was the issue, then the approach they took made absolutely zero sense.
Lynn, what we're talking about is the Students First plan that was presented to the public, as I remember, late August, just as the school year was starting.
That's right.
Okay. Now, if I remember correctly, back with the Binger Commission, the Binger Commission said a couple of things. One, we've got to get control of the central administration and reform the central administration. And there was an outline to do that, and there was a fairly expeditious approach to that, which the union, by the way, as I remember it, supported that.
Absolutely.
Okay. But the other part of the Binger Commission, and it didn't speak so directly, was that if school reform is really going to work, there's going to have to be change in the classroom and change to the teacher's contract, to the union contract. The union contract was too complex, it was too binding, it bound up the school system. Is that, in effect, what we're seeing now is sort of phase 2 of trying to implement the vision that was there in the early 90s?
I think that there's a real distinction there that needs to be made. The Binger Commission really dealt with business issues because it was developed by business community volunteers, and it dealt with purchasing and computers and facilities, and it dealt with those issues around which business had expertise. They never got into educational issues, and they never should. What you're talking about is Students First, which is the district's change plan. It's an initiative because, frankly, business as usual is not working, and we need to make change. And that's in part what the contract negotiations were about, was making change. And so that plan, Students First, was developed with extensive input from parents and teachers. It was not cooked up in a back room. It was aired very publicly. There were very extensive negotiations by Tom on changes in that plan that were made all the while that contract negotiations were going on. So the two things were proceeding on simultaneous tracks. Now, did the union get everything they want in Students First, the strategic initiative? No. But that doesn't mean that it's not a plan that's supported by teachers. It's an important change that we need to take place in order to strengthen academic achievement, empower parents, and improve our schools.
We've got a fundamental disagreement here. You say teachers were involved, you also say Tom had influence, and meaning the CFT, not just Tom personally. The teachers who were involved in putting together Students First, were they handpicked by the board to avoid the union members?
Absolutely not. And the union was very involved in it.
Look,
do you disagree with that,
It depends on, we're confusing the issues, depends on what the timeline is. The conversation started with, we got to get this done fast. Well, the way to get it done fast is not to spring it on people and then create an antagonistic environment. And even if you get it done fast that way, the wounds left may make it tough to implement.
Some would argue, though,
but let me just finish the point. There was no involvement up to the point that the draft plan was released, as you said, a year ago, August. There was, yes, lots of debate, lots of input in the public arena after that time. And yes, changes were made that were good changes. Frankly, I don't think that the core essence of Student First is any longer, there's really not big controversy about that. What is still a current issue that relates to this backdrop is the way the board does business. And you brought up the business community. And so that the central issue, I think, now is, are we going to see the same thing again with the facilities master plan that they're now working on, which they have delayed from its original July release date till after the election, interestingly enough. Are we going to see the same behind the scenes, cook it up, spring it on people, and then have a couple perfunctory public hearings and pass it no matter how many parents,
Harriet,
customers, or teachers don't agree with it?
Harriet, is a group of, is there a group of business people cooking something up in a back room right now that's going to be sprung on people and surprise people after this election?
Absolutely not. Let me say to you that the facilities master plan is being developed by an advisory group of 25. Half of them are parents, and most of them are active parents. Only 2 individuals on that structure are from businesses, and they happen to be responsible for the buildings, the maintenance development of 2 major companies, sharing their expertise. But if they're 2 of 25, they're not dominating. The other thing is that there are public hearings planned before Election Day, and they will be announced with adequate time. We will make sure, and I monitor this as a member of the Facilities Committee. I nominated parents that are serving on that committee, all right? I feel very strongly that we must have parent and community reaction throughout the process. We did not delay this process deliberately. Our architectural advisors are telling us that new state standards are coming out. We're not going to pay an architect twice.
Okay. We've got to take a break for a moment, but we've only scratched the surface, and we're coming back. And stay tuned. You come back as well, because afterwards we'll talk about the political implications of some of the issues that are brought up in the first part. Welcome back. Now, we could continue to talk about the real issues, the education issues, and I don't want to belittle those, but we are in the political season, and these letters are political letters, because they're to the Democratic Party saying, don't endorse these two people. Lynn, my impression is you're a lifelong Democrat. Is that true?
I have been a member of the Democratic Party, yes.
Do you consider yourself a Democrat still?
Yes.
Do you feel that, one of the charges here is basically you're under the control of the business community and the CBC, and you've switched jobs, and you're now working for a corporation, for Kroger's, and therefore you've gone over to the other side. I mean, that's basically the way I read this.
Well, let me point out a couple things. First of all, school board is a nonpartisan race. The last time I ran, I was endorsed by both parties, and I would seek the endorsement of both parties this time. That's because parties, generally speaking, endorse school board candidates that they feel are going to do a good job for kids and for the community, and that's what I think they should use as their criteria. The issue about who I work for is totally irrelevant. I am just like everybody else and get up and go make a living every day, and frankly, I find attacks or questions about who I work for to be very personal and very inappropriate.
But they're in here.
Yeah, if we want to talk about the issues, the real issues are quality of schools and making sure that all of our students are achieving. Those are the real issues. If we want to talk about whether there's control of the school board, I think what's going on here is Mr. Mooney doesn't have control of the school board, so he figures somebody else must be controlling them. The reality is I'm elected to listen to parents, teachers, the taxpayers, people in the community who don't have kids in the school, and that's what I do. That's my job.
Harriet, you're not only a Democrat, you've been very active as a precinct captain, as a ward chairman over the years. How do you react to this sort of call that you shouldn't be endorsed by the Democratic Party from the union?
Let me say that I was elected to the school board in 1993 with a broad base of support, all right, from parents, from people of both parties, from former students. I believe that I will be reelected this year because what I have done is in the sense of being a former teacher. I've done my homework. I make site visits to schools. I listen to parents. I get out in the community and really try to work to improve the education of the children. I think that's so important for our future. And I really do not, I think that if the issue is control, that's unfortunate. The school board is elected to be committed to improving student achievement, and that's why I'm there.
Tom?
This is, we're skirting the issue because the issue is the CBC's control of the board. And that's why the board doesn't have to listen to parents, doesn't have to listen to teachers, doesn't have to listen to ordinary citizens, and they really don't, because they are only accountable to the people that slated and financed them. 6 of the 7 sitting board members were slated. There is a party that slates candidates called the CBC, and they finance their campaigns with about 25 phone calls. Virtually all the contributions of 6 of the 7 incumbents came from the CBC companies, their PACs, their executives, or a couple big law firms with close business ties to the CBC. It's just painfully obvious. And that's why we're so worried that this facilities master plan will come out, and that no matter what the parents, the customers might have to say about it, it's going to get done the way they want it done, whether it makes any sense educationally or not. Lynn's employment, by the way, is relevant only because it illustrates the close ties to the CBC in ways that we think conflict with the board's accountability to the public. She was until May a partner in Dinsmore and Scholl, which not only has P&G as one of its biggest clients, but more importantly, represents the state in the lawsuit defending the current state funding system, which is not good for Cincinnati kids and taxpayers. Let me finish that point. And why is Kroger relevant? Not because it's a corporation. Lots of people work for corporations. Nothing wrong with that. The fact is, though, that their CEO is the chair, the co-chair of the CBC's schools task force, which has been guiding the board in its policies very actively for the last couple of years, and the
Lynn,
board
are these
officers
legitimate areas?
report in regularly to that
Absolutely
committee.
outrageous. Kroger has 200,000 employees, and they encourage community service, and that's what I view my position on the school board to be. No one at Kroger or any place else has ever told me to vote a certain way or to come up with a certain plan that has a certain outcome to it. There is no sinister control here, and I don't know where Tom is getting this.
Can I ask a
unless
question?
he thinks that it's the control that he ought to have and that he doesn't have.
Can I ask a question? Simple
Hold on
question.
just a second. Harriet?
Let me point out for everyone's benefit that of the 7 present board members, 6 of the 7 board members have been screened and endorsed by the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers. If they are disappointed with us, perhaps one ought to ask why. Is it because we decided that that most important was the education of children, and that we had to that the way things were going was not working, and that it was time to get a grip? This board has gotten a grip. We've adopted a plan. We've clearly gone K-8. We are moving towards team-based schools. This is in the best interest of children.
Okay, Tom, I've got to say that, you know, one of the things I hear, and I think legitimately from teachers, as a former teacher myself, that if people could get into the classroom, if reporters, if business people, if computer programs could spend several months or a year being a teacher in a classroom, they would get a different perspective on the world. It sounds to me like you're saying that here we've got a couple of people who have been teachers who are now doing something different. They're serving on the board and have gained now another perspective, and you're saying it's not legitimate to have another perspective on these
No, I'm not.
issues.
I'm saying it's
that they should stay tuned in to the teacher's perspective.
No, I'm saying, look, I'm also a parent. I've got 2 kids in the schools, and I'm very afraid of what they are doing to the schools with simplistic, quick fixes and reorganizations upon reorganizations that are driving families out of the schools. And the numbers this fall support that.
Do the numbers support that? Because that was the issue this past week at the school board.
No,
Well,
they don't
I'll-
support
let-
it. In
let-
fact,
let me
we've
show you some numbers if you want to talk
attracted
about
back
that.
We have attracted back new families to the district. We have lost fewer families than we have before. And Tom would love to say that the out-migration, and we do have a loss in population of students attending the district, is because of what the board is doing. And yet I never hear him talk about the fact that we have some very uneven quality in our school district. We have schools where
Absolutely
none
true.
of the children pass the math proficiency test at age 8 and 9. This school board is serious about trying to make changes.
So
and
then
he's
why
not
did
gonna
they close
agree
one of the-
with all those changes.
Why did they close one of the most academically successful schools in the district this fall?
Name
Why
it.
did they, Cheviot, and close Roll Hill, another academically successful school, and closed Clifton, another bilingual magnet school, and causing a net loss of people from the district? See, this whole West Side
First
plan,
off, did you close those schools?
No, we did not close Cheviot. We responded to the concerns out on the western side of town because we were every year losing students to non-public schools. People would finish the 6th grade at Cheviot, the child would, and then they would leave the public school system. That was the first complaint I got when I arrived as a school board member, was I do not want my child going into the Gamble Middle School. All right, for whatever reasons, this board has faced the fact that middle schools in this district have not worked successfully. We are not pointing blame, we are just simply correcting the situation. We didn't close Cheviot, we reorganized it. All right, I have visited Cheviot. We have attracted more than 50 children back to Cheviot from non-public schools since the opening of school.
Okay.
We have reversed the exodus in that
Wrong.
part
That's just
in
not
that
true.
area.
We're going to run out of time, so if you very quickly, I'll let you to respond to
well,
that.
they actually lost quite a few students from Cheviot and from all these West Side schools that they reorganized. About 1,300 kids fewer in those schools total than they predicted.
Those aren't the numbers that I see.
And 250 kids from those West Side reorganized schools alone that are missing, either left
Lynn,
the system or gone
we're
to the
almost out of
parochial
time, but go
schools.
ahead.
We can't let that go uncountered. That is not true. In fact, what we're hearing is that we did the right thing, that parents and teachers are enthusiastic about K-8 and about the changes that we made last fall.
I just want to say, and it seems to me that something with middle schools or junior highs, which I think we would all recognize have been a problem area.
K-8 is not the issue.
The issue is, seems to me, whether we're going to make changes to improve education, and then how fast we're going to make those, and in what direction,
what
and who
changes.
controls that,
Yeah,
and
it's
who
what
controls
changes.
that.
That's
So
right.
this is not the end of this, and we will come back to it during this election year, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Join us again next Sunday when we will again talk in depth with the women and the men working now to shape Cincinnati tomorrow.